Well, so I started with the Allied placement, and I think they're done. According to the rule set I have, they get no replacements or no supply points in December. Now, in the newer edition of the rule, they've changed that, but it's very specific in this. I mean, they actually remind you here, note that there are no December 1914 supply points for Great Britain. The new edition changes that, and it kind of phases supplies in during the December turn, probably because the situation. I looked at it, and it looks like the whole replacement and reinforcement thing is completely different. I'd have to reread it and see. This isn't a matter of changing one line here and there on the rules. It's not an errata type of thing. It's a living rules in the sense that, well, they're alive and they completely change. And that's why probably there is no change log. You really have to have that whole rule book. I don't like that trend in gaming in general. I'm going to play with the rules I have. Where I have a question, where I feel like something needs to be looked up and clarified, I'll look in those rules. But here, I looked at this and I said, I can't change that much in a rule book. I have to start. This is a totally new edition of the game that's the online version as far as I'm concerned. And, I just can't cope with that kind of thing. And again, I have to say, you probably want to hold off and wait until they reprint this, because obviously game balance, etc. The situation that I'm in with the Allies not having any supplies is part of the issue. They get a trickle of supplies in, but they also get less from now on in the new rules. So it's like avoids them having the deep depth of a problem in December, but also will give them a few more points. I didn't look at how the Germans are. They probably have more too, just because it's not going to make too big a difference, to tell you the truth, because both armies will run through whatever they have, So however it's balanced or whatever, maybe they tweaked it a little bit, got a little bit more realism. But overall, I don't think it's going to make much difference. Anyway, I'm playing with what the printed rules that come in the game are as much as I can. Where I cannot, I will look things up. Like with the Belgians, where I looked it up and said, okay, yeah, it's ridiculous, but I'm kind of hybriding it anyway because it's too late. All right. I guess that's it. I mean, the French didn't really do anything. One thing that's kind of neat is taking a look at it from this side, just watching, the perspective's just so different when you change the board. Just watching that curve of the front. That's so impressive to me to look at, that big. I don't know. It doesn't look the same here to me. It looks, I don't know, like just like a war game. But when I see it from this angle, which is, the angle that I see, say, on a map or something, it's just so different. Just looks like this line of blue and gray running along each other, really defining the front in a nice way. Look from over here at the German side, and again, it looks like a war game. This time the Germans made a number of attacks. Along the line here, 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 and here. And in all cases, they were conserving supply. I think they may have spent a couple of points on this attack over here. They got nowhere and actually suffered worse losses. It could be the tide is turning a little bit. It's still tough. I think the French just kind of got lucky this turn in terms of die rolls. A lot of the die rolls went against the Germans badly. But that's bound to happen at some point or another, and it may just give the French the impetus to be able to continue onward. There are weak spots, places like this where I look at it and say, wow, the Germans should really remove that fort, and then they could perhaps start pinching this off. It's tough, though. You've got your commitment to your one offensive over here, and if you stop that and go after another entrenched position with fortifications, etc., it's this whole change of things, and you have to shift all your supplies over there. The supplies have so far just been totally concentrated on my bulge right now, and that sounds kind of gross. Anyway, that's where we are. Onto the French repositioning for all this. Oh man, I noticed withdrawals December 1st for the Germans. Since I only had replacement points coming in, I had no indication that I had to go look in the rule book there. I hadn't put any kind of marker to indicate, yeah, they're withdrawing. I was being kind of lazy. Well, that means I've gotten 2 attacks in with those extra units. Plus, I started looking for them, and boy, is that a bitch. I got to hunt through everything to find these guys. Now, conceivably, I could pull out units that aren't those instead of them, but that kind of causes problems, because then when those units re-enter, which they may or may not do, there's no way of knowing that. There's no easy way of getting them. The game needs some play aids to handle that. It really does. It needs some little holding boxes for the withdrawn units if they come back. You know, hey, if you're withdrawing the 8ES, it goes on the board here until it comes back in, so that you can kind of remind you. Without that kind of, and it's easy enough to make those, but I haven't done it because, you know, I haven't experienced this before with this game. So it's not really, you know, an easy situation. Anyway, in many, many ways, I'm beginning to think that this is a game which appeals a lot more if you have like a vassal type situation, the game, the engine vassal, in order to run your game off of, because I'm sure it has all kind of features built in to take care of stuff. You don't have to hunt through all the pieces and everything. Setting up all that all becomes much, much easier with these big games. Unfortunately for me, that's not what I enjoy doing. I want to play on a board. I've played games with a lot of pieces, big setups, etc. I don't know if I've had one where I had to hunt down specific units where I don't have some kind of indication where they are. This is just such a broad front with so much movement, etc., that it's kind of tricky. Obviously, again, pulling the wrong pieces out would be an acceptable and probably a preferable option. But then when I can't find them in my counter mix, what do I do? You know, got to try to guess what I'm supposed to bring in or whatever. Going to be painful. Too much work. I've just gone to pulling the number counters out. And, you know, honestly, if I've got foreign units or whatever, they're going to get screwed over. I'm not going to know. Because if I see something that says a 7-4, I'm not going to know if it's the proper unit or not anymore. That's a problem with this situation. There's not the distinguishment on here of what type, what country, what nationality of the various things there are. Is that a big deal for the Germans? Not terribly, but it is for the Allies. They have a lot of constituent country forces. Withdrawing one of them changes the nature of the game, perhaps. I don't know. Only slightly. But anyway, it's just not worth the headache. You know, it's not worth the headache of tracking that stuff down for this. Just the hell with it. I'll put what I can out. I'll just try to get the numbers kind of right and hope for the best. It's not like I haven't made some major mistakes or that there haven't been some big differences anyway on the line. And hey, I cheated and stayed in for 2 extra turns there with those units. What the hell? Yeah. This may be too many pieces on the board for an operational game, too dense for my taste. And, you know, I like it when it's going smoothly, but when I have to deal with those aspects, it's not so cool. And playing it on Vassal would be pointless to me. So it's not really an option. It's why I shied away. There was a game showed at Consim World, some guy from the UK who had this thing with huge stacks of units. Every unit was the same strength. You know, this would all be fixed if it was just a pure strength point game, which is what I think it feels like anyway. You're allowed to kind of shake things up, combine them everywhere. Hey, make it all strength points and make the foreign units, etc., be more distinguishable. Don't worry about your designations and all that, because in essence, it really is a strength point game, and that's kind of the problem. It could be handled that way better, I think. German attacks have been chosen to be made here. We're kind of trying to pull units back and replace them. And these have been mobile attacks, and here, which was successful, the other one was not, in an attempt to turn the flanks. So if they took this hex, they would have had the opposite sides, and, well, this would have still been defended. So it would just be slowly turning it. But here, the success is now they get to make an attack against this and negate the trench effect, which puts this just in the plains and makes it kind of a difficult space to hold. It's going to allow a second attack, a follow-up, to destroy the trenches there and shorten the line. And any thoughts I had of containment were kind of delusional. The Germans punched through here, driving the last little remnants of the British, the Anglo-French group that was there. That's going to lengthen their line or force them to pull back with the English. But the English are holding a defensive position that they didn't want to give up. Likewise, breakthrough here, not surprising where the trench line was, actually up here. This was the breakthrough they made. They're rolling it up so that the French are going to have to pull back from the river line there. Reims is in serious danger here. What else do we have? We succeeded in rolling up onto closer to Paris again. We're surrounding Paris, basically. I just don't want to spend the points on the artillery up here to get it down here so that I can spend more points on that. It's not an efficient use in my book. Of course, once the artillery, the artillery can fire and get rid of fortifications almost for free, and then you can march in. I'm also a little in question whether or not, I know I scored some of these. I don't know if I scored all of them. What is a hex side is not terribly well defined from what I can tell. So maybe I shouldn't have scored these demoralization points yet. Maybe control of a hex side means you have to have both sides of it. That kind of makes sense. And I think I already scored points for those. I haven't scored points for the city center, though, yet. And I'll try to remember that in that sense. I was thinking, I got a hex side here, but I don't really control it if I don't have both sides, I think. So I think I screwed up there. Not a big deal. Anyway, it's looking pretty harsh for the Allies at this point. Just in terms, and you could say, well, it's the Belgians' fault. They're not in the line. Yeah, maybe. It's just a matter that you can't stop these offensives. I don't know how to. I could throw lots and lots of troops in, but I don't have lots and lots of troops. Maybe I didn't strip things off quickly enough. But if I had stripped faster from here before the Germans did, I think I'd be losing territory here. In fact, I'm afraid that the Germans are going to attack here soon anyway. I don't see how to stop them there either. It's just really an ugly situation for the Allies. Anyway, I'll try to figure out where to put their troops and where to try to build a new line. It's beginning to look more and more like Paris is something I'm going to fall back from. I've lost most of that territory. Well, I discover I've been cheating in favor of the Allies as well. Both sides really, but more for the Allies' favor. The recombination rules state that neither the units recombining nor the headquarters can have moved. And I've kind of been shifting things around and funneling them through very quickly. Now, that hasn't meant a lot for the Germans, to tell you the truth. In fact, there have been turns where they've been sitting around with replacement points because I couldn't pull stuff off the line easily. They're out right now, and there's actually extra strength points there. But, I've been just shifting my French up, converting them into regular units, and then they're in the line the next turn. That wouldn't be possible. I don't know. In fact, it looks like they can do it if they're in a zone of control type situation. So here, for example, I could convert units because I'd be placing them on the same turn that I convert them. A little disturbing there, but okay. Anyway, that's actually quicker than I've generally been doing it. I wanted to look up to see, hey, I really do kind of want to be on the line here. So I'm probably not going to fall this back. I'll let that create some extra troops on the line. Although, wait, that's an urban hex, not a city center. I don't know where I can bring reinforcements in. I got to look that up. Some of them come in on specific hexes, but after a certain point, they're just, hey, they show up at urban hexes, I think. I don't know. We'll see. Well, now that I know that rule, it feels like the allies are pinched to the breaking point. I don't know what I can possibly do. Pull back behind this river. Basically, I'm opening up a gap and allowing the Germans into it. I really don't know what else to do here. It looks like they've driven a separation between the two armies. If I had that quick recuperation even, I don't think I could have filled this gap. I was thinking about the possibility of pushing armies down and making an attack on this unit with the British army and seeing if I had enough force to hold the trench line and make that attack, but I would have been holding it with scraps, really, at best. I don't see much hope for the Allies at this point. I think this is about over for whatever value that is. I'm going to load this one up, and, well, we'll keep playing a bit longer, see where it goes, but it may get to the point where it's just pointless to continue. It's just, not only too far from history because of errors that I've made or rules that have changed, or that it's just not interesting anymore. What I'm not seeing the German attacks being slowed, and I don't feel like, other than the Belgians, and they are a serious oops, but that I hold the rule book accountable for them, changing it in the living rules essentially to handle this kind of situation exactly, saying, well, that's no fun. I hold that to be the issue here, rather than me missing a rule like I did. The rules that I've missed actually feel like they've aided the Allies situation a little bit. Anyway, it's an exercise, All right, up it goes.
Terrain can have a significant impact on combat. This is just common sense. You would expect a defender in woods to have a lot of cover, so they would take fewer losses, while they would probably inflict more on the attacker, and this is in fact the case. When you decide to initiate a combat, you need to know what terrain would come into play and what impact that terrain will have on the battle. When a hex is attacked, the defender looks at which hex sides the attack is coming through. This provides him with the options for selecting defensive terrain, the terrain that will influence the combat. The defender has the option of using the terrain in any of the hex sides an attack comes through, as well as any adjacent hex sides. Let me show this to you graphically. Take a look at this generic hex diagram from the rules. Here you have hex X and hexes A through F for the surrounding hexes, and the hex sides in hex X are 1 through 6. Let's say hex X in this generic diagram is attacked by forces in hex A and B. The attack would then come through hex sides 1 and 2 in this diagram. The defender in hex X could choose to use the terrain in hex sides 1 or 2, as well as the terrain in hex sides 3 or 6, as these are hex sides adjacent to the ones that the attack is coming through. Note that he could not use, in this example, the terrain in hex sides 4 or 5 because they are not adjacent to the hex sides the attack is coming through. The defender can make the choice as to which terrain to use, given his options, because he has wide latitude in picking his defensive positions. And obviously, he's going to defend using the most advantageous terrain available to him. Now let's look at hex 2006 on the map. Let's say that this hex is attacked by units only in hex 2107. This arrow would show the direction of this particular attack. In this case, the terrain in the hex side that the attack is coming through is clear, but there is broken terrain in an adjacent hex side. So this is the terrain the defender would probably pick for defense. Note that the defender could not pick the wood in this hex side back here as a defensive terrain. That's because this terrain is not adjacent to the hex side that the attack is coming through. But now let's look at a different case. In this new case, hex 2006 is under attack by forces in hex 2005 and 2106. In this case, the defender could pick woods as the defensive terrain, as the hex side the woods is in is adjacent to a hex side through which the attack is coming. The effects of terrain on combat are shown on the terrain effects chart, which is found on the back side of most of the rule books. Let's look at it again here. Here's a list of the different terrain types in the left-hand column. In the last two columns, you'll see the adjustments terrain has on combat for the attacker and the defender. For the defenders for the counterattack. Notice the effects are mostly adjustments made to the die roll the attacker and the defender will make to determine enemy losses. For example, the defender chooses broken terrain to influence combat. The attacker's die roll is reduced by 1, and no adjustment would be made to the defender's counterattack die roll. In another case, for example, the defender may choose woods as the terrain to influence combat. In this case, the attacker's die roll would be reduced by 2, whereas the defender's counterattack die roll would be increased by 1. These die roll adjustments have a noticeable effect on combat, and players should always keep terrain in mind when deciding on defensive positions and when making decisions about attacks. One more note, and this is about rivers. Let's look again at hex 2006. If this hex is attacked solely from hex 2005, as shown by this arrow, then the river between the two hexes would also affect the combat. This is because a river influences combat only when all of the attacking units are attacking across rivers. If hex 2006 were attacked by enemy units in both 2005 and 2106, then the river would not come into play. This is because there is no river in the hex side between 2006 and 2106. The terrain effects of a river are in addition to the effects of hex side terrain. Let's look again at the case of an attack solely from hex 2005 into 2006, as shown by the arrow. The defender is going to pick woods as the defensive terrain, it being an option due to being in an adjacent hex side to the hex side that the attack is coming through. In addition, the defender is going to get the benefit of defending against a river crossing. This means in the case of this attack, the attacker's die roll is going to get modified by -4, -2 for the woods, and minus another 2 for the river. These adjustments will significantly reduce the losses the attacker will be able to inflict on units defending in hex 2006. For the defender in this case, his counterattack die roll will be increased by 2, +1 for the woods, and plus another 1 for the river. And this will probably mean more losses for the attacker. Let's look at another example. Let's say that we have 2 German units in hex 1512 right here, the 6th Landwehr Brigade and the 1st Reserve Division. The reserve division is under a -1 strength marker. That's the yellow counter you can barely see here. And notice too that I've spread the units apart just a little bit within the hexes so that you can see the important details. These two German units are going to come under attack by the Russian units you see in the adjacent hexes. The Russians have the 4th and 6th divisions in hex 1412 and the 1st, 8th, and 3rd Guard divisions in hex 1513. Let me remove the pieces momentarily so you can see the terrain more easily. Since the attack is coming from hexes 1412 and 1513, the defender has a number of options for defensive terrain. There is clear terrain in both of the hex sides that the attack is coming from, but there is broken terrain and woods in hex sides adjacent to the hex sides that the attack is coming through. So in this case, the defender is going to choose woods as the defensive terrain. Now let's see the units again. The attacker has a total of 22 strength points, 5 plus 5 plus 4 in this hex, plus another 4 plus 4 in this hex. Since woods has been selected as the defensive terrain, the attacker's die roll will be reduced by 2. And let's say the attacker rolls a 3. So after adjustment, it's going to be a 1. On the combat results table, a 1 on the 22 column means that the attacker will inflict a 2 strength point loss on the defenders. The defender has a strength of 6, 2 for the brigade, 4 for the understrength division. This will be multiplied by 3 to determine the column to be used on the combat results table. So in the counterattack, the German is going to use the 18 column. Now let's say the defender also rolls a 3. But due to woods, this is increased by 1. That's the counterattack adjustment. So he cross-indexes 4, the 18 column, and the Germans determine that they've inflicted 3 strength point losses on the attackers. For the German defenders, they're going to have to lose the 2 strength points by reducing both units to their backside strength. So the German player flips both units over and removes the -1 strength reduction marker from off of the division. Remember that we determined that the Russians in this combat will lose 3 strength points. To take this loss, the Russian player decides to flip over the 6th division in hex 1412 and to place both the 3rd Guard and 1st divisions in hex 1513 under a -1 strength reduction marker. And this is what it would look like after the Russian player takes his losses. To retreat means to leave your positions under attack. In the game, it means to move out of the hex that has been attacked in the combat. Retreat reduces the losses the defender suffers in a combat. By retreating, the defender's losses are reduced by 1/3. In most cases, the 1/3 is found by rounding to the nearest whole number. For example, 4 reduced by 1/3 is 3, while 11 reduced by 1/3 is 7. Retreating will also reduce the defender's ability to inflict losses on the attacker by counterattacking. Retreating is not always voluntary. In many cases, and I'll get into this later, the defender must retreat. In any case, if a defender is going to retreat, he must declare this prior to counterattacking. This is because retreating units are not tripled for the counterattack. Instead, they are only doubled. Now let's look at a simple example that you see on the screen. Let's say that the Germans attack this Russian unit in hex 2606, the 7th Siberian Division, with the 20 strength points that they have adjacent to it. And let's say the attack die roll calls for the defender to lose 3 strength points. The Russian player declares that the 7th Siberian Division will retreat. This will reduce the losses by 1/3. So instead of losing 3 strength points, the Russian unit will lose only 2. In the counterattack, rather than tripling the defender's strength and using the 15 column on the combat results table, the Russian player will only double the unit strength to 10 as this unit is going to retreat. Let's take a look at what this will then look like. The Russian unit takes his losses and retreats. And then, just to finish out the example, let's say the results of the counterattack are a 1 strength point loss on the attacker that the German player elects to take out of the Landwehr Brigade. So here now you can see both sides have taken losses, and the retreating defender has moved out of the hex and away from the enemy. The defender has options when retreating, but he must retreat according to the priorities outlined in the rules. In general, he retreats to get out of enemy zones of control and retreats closer to a friendly headquarters. This is because, in retreating, units are trying to get away from the enemy and will generally retreat back towards their supply source. Different retreating units from the same hex may retreat to different hexes of the same retreat priority. To see this, let's look at a variation of the previous example. In this case, the Russians have 2 divisions in hex 2606. As before, let's say the German attack inflicts a 3 strength point loss on the Russians. The Russian player declares that he will retreat, reducing his losses by 1/3 from 3 to 2. He takes the losses as shown, but since both hexes 2706 and 2707 are both out of an enemy zone of control, and both are the same distance from the Russian headquarters, the Russian player can move 1 unit into 2706 and the other into 2707. Retreating units remain in an enemy zone of control only when there are no other higher priority options. In this example, the Russian player attacks a German unit in hex 1612. Let's say that the attack result is a 3 and the German declares that he will retreat. Both hexes 1611 and 1712 are in enemy zones of control. They're occupied by other German units. In this case, the German unit would retreat to hex 1712, as it has no options to retreat outside of enemy zones of control, and hex 1712 happens to be closer to the German headquarters than hex 1611. Let's take a look at the result. This shows the result of the retreat and the German losses. Also, I wanted to show you that the Russians would probably take 2 strength points in losses as a result of the German counterattacking at strength 10 due to doubling rather than tripling, plus the Germans would have had woods as defensive terrain and would have had a +2 die roll modifier for their counterattack. As I alluded to earlier, often the defender is forced to retreat. Soldiers are rarely suicidal, and most will abandon their positions when they feel they are in extreme danger. In the Tannenberg introductory game, the German player is forced to retreat if the result of the attack would cause him to lose more than half of the strength defending in a hex. The Russian player is forced to retreat if an attack would cause him to lose more than 1/3 of the strength defending in a hex. Whether forced or not, retreat has the same result. The defender reduces his losses by a third, and his counterattack is weakened. This means that in the example of the Germans attacking into hex 2606, that even a result of 2 would force this Russian unit to retreat, as this would be more than a third of the strength defending in the hex. After the defender retreats, attacking units have the option of moving into the vacated hex. This is called advance after combat. The attacker gets to choose which of his units advance into the vacated hex, but no unit can move into the hex until all other units that lost a greater percentage of their strength in the combat are advanced first. This reflects the fact that units pushing the furthest forward in an attack are going to take the highest losses. Let's go back to the first example of retreat to show advance after combat. The Germans have attacked and caused the Russians to retreat from hex 2606. So the German attackers could advance into this hex. The unit that must advance first is the 6th Landwehr Brigade, as it is the only unit involved in the combat that took losses. Note also that in taking a 1 strength point loss, the brigade lost half of its strength, going from 2 to 1. This would mean it would advance into a vacated hex before, say, a 5-5 reduced to a 3-5 in an attack, because that unit would have lost less than half, and the unit that lost the greater portion of its strength in the attack advances first. After it advances, let's move the 6th Landwehr into the vacated hex. The German player could choose to send any other units involved in the attack into 2606 as well. So we could send this guy and this guy, or he could just send the 6th Landwehr Brigade, or he could just keep everyone where they were and choose not to advance at all. In this example, the Russians attacked and forced the Germans to retreat from hex 1612. They retreated back to 1712, as you remember. And the Russian attackers took 2 strength points of losses, 1 strength point each from the 6th and 8th divisions. The Russians can now advance into hex 1612, but the 6th and 8th divisions would advance first, and both would have to advance into hex 1612 before any additional units could. This means that, because of how the Russian player decided to take his losses, the Russians could not advance either of the units from hex 1613 into hex 1612 without both the 6th and 8th divisions moving into that hex first. This shows you that you need to be wise in how you take your losses. In this case, it may not have been best to have taken losses with the 8th division, and instead maybe the Russian player should have put a -1 marker on one of the divisions in hex 1613 instead. This would have provided better options for advance after combat for him.
All right, turn 4 of December 1914, and the German assault has run into some difficulties, to tell you the truth. They made a nice little breakthrough here. They did a mobile attack and swung around here, attacking the Brits from behind here, negating the trench, and they've completely surrounded this unit. But they've got a lot of weak units in the way. I think this is going to work out very badly for them. And they spent some supplies to do the initial assault and even the follow-up. I don't think it's turned out well for them at all. Of course, if they don't get dislodged somehow from there, they couldn't reinforce into here with more units, because the restrictions on who can advance and who can't is it has to be the weakest unit that advances, or weakest units. And the weakest units were both back here, the ones that went around the corner. They were the ones that could advance into this hex and leave this one free. So these kind of encircling motions, they leave you with a weak, you don't end up with your solid front facing the enemy necessarily. And in this case, it just couldn't happen. I didn't have enough force coming around from behind and ended up too weak there. It's a live and learn type situation. Another bad situation was here. They hit this line, and I don't see any casualties on the French, and I know they took some, so I think I forgot to give them what they took. They took a couple. I did it to the German. The Germans took significantly more, like 5 points of damage for that attack. I also looked into bombarding this fort, but it costs like 5 supply. I don't have that kind of supply. I make 30 a month. Spending 5 in a turn at this point would be too much, and I've kind of done close to that already this turn. I would be out if I spent that, and that would leave me completely vulnerable to the British attack. So instead I shifted more supplies over to this sector where there's real problems along the line. You can see our supply points there. The 4th and 1st armies are up there. They have only 2. The 2nd Army's been acting as kind of a waypoint. I shifted some supplies that I hadn't been using from the 3rd Army. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this whole system is the effectiveness of cavalry on the West Front. It's got to do with the lack of supplies. Okay, they're not as good as the big infantry divisions. There's no question there. But they don't tend to take losses, so they tend to be reasonably solid. And without supply, they provide about what a weaker infantry division does, or damaged one. So they end up not being at all useless. They're serving some good purposes on the line. Not fantastic, but decent enough. I don't know. I don't know where we are at this point, just in terms of... Oh, well. Oh, there was another thought. So the way I had been doing the recombination of units, it's a real pain in the butt to do it the way the rules dictate. So I've moved, a German 5-pointer here, but I've got to remember which ones are there that moved this turn and which ones are there from prior turns in order to say, try to recombine and bring stuff. Plus, if I pull stuff off the line, it's got to be out for an entire turn before it can recombine and doesn't get to move the turn it recombines. So, yeah, it's just it makes sense, but it's an annoyingly detailed little piece that doesn't really help a lot, in my opinion, in terms of it makes the play a little too complex and a little too difficult. There's already tons of stuff to remember, tons of addition. There aren't a lot of war games that I'll have to have multiple calculators out in. Usually it's ones with lots and lots of counting like this one. And I find a lot of these factors kind of a difficulty, not necessarily a huge hindrance, but something that it's going to always be a harder task to approach this game, just knowing all the sort of mechanical aspects, the amount of counters that need sorting, whatever, the difficulty of parsing the replacements chart. Just there's a lot of stuff in here that was designed without a lot of thought towards how it would actually play out on a board and how easily you could handle it that way. Like I said, it may be a much, much better game with, the computer assistance of a vassal board, but I play board war games, not computer war games.
Well, now that I'm withdrawing not specific units, but strength points essentially, well, now I've got a 1-4 infantry brigade, the 185T.
Now that was a 2-4 counter. I don't know what to do. My assumption of that under the reading of the rules is, well, I would remove the 185T or whatever it is. And if it's less than 1 strength point, I have to find a strength point somehow. I can't find it. I'm not bothering with that anymore. So now I have to remove what? It's not a 2-4.
A reduced 2-4, I got to search through here and try to find one of those. Do I have one? I don't know. They may all be dead. They may be all over here. If they are, what do I do? Do I just take a replacement point? Then I don't have the counter over in here that I need if this counter comes back, because there's no indication over here whether it comes back or not, of course. There's no kind of helpful aids like that to indicate what you're going to need later. And just a number, it puts me in a conundrum. I'm just going to remove a strength point somewhere. And then if it comes in, well, who knows what comes in its place. I mean, I just don't know anymore. It's gotten really painful because of the way the strength points are handling this. It is a strength point game. Just handle it as such. Don't worry about this. You got to remove one strength point, remove a strength point. The units do not show that much differentiation. I don't know how much, how much do you really gain by having this differentiation between 8-4s and 5-5, or 8-5s and 5-5s being both on the field? You can pretty much shift them around as you like. Yeah, you got this mechanical pain in the ass if you've got to recombine them at a headquarters. There is that. So there is some effect of it. But you can just pull out whatever kind of units you think you like when you do the recombination. I think. I'm not sure. All right. I found the little bugger. He was dead over here. I didn't know there were any 1-4s. And the rule book does not distinguish. It doesn't tell you. Sometimes its numbers seem wrong. Do I bring in a weaker unit? Do I not? It's all not clear on these things. And you can fudge all this stuff. There's no question. But I'm beginning to grow very, very weary of the manual aspects of this game. In fact, I think to some extent the last straw was the recombination rules. That is really becoming sort of the thing that was that final barrier that's making this just a little too much for me to suffer through. All right, well, the Brits did a counterattack, punched their way back through. The Germans still have this line here. And you know what's really annoying about this, the way the replacements work? It means that I can't step away. I have to play out a complete player's turn, a side of the battle in one sitting, because I've got to try to remember what's sitting here. I can't position and say I've done all the attacks across here, or I've moved up to here, or anything along those lines. I've got to do it all in one sitting. Now, that hasn't been a real issue so far in this, but it is also, it is a way that I handle sometimes these larger games. And either that, or I have to start coming up with more additional counters, like I did with the, this is a unit that's coming in on this month, that on this turn 3 months later, where I had to put a counter in play for that. Now I'm going to have to put some kind of marker in place, and I have to put little markers to remind me what turns I'm withdrawing units, because withdrawal is all, something different from here, where I have to look in this separate book and that I'm constantly flipping through to figure out when things come in, etc., and what supplies I get and what replacements I'm getting. Yes, I have most of that marked ahead, but there are too few German replacement counters to actually cover what they get in a month. There are tons and tons of French replacement counters, but for some reason, and more than I need, for some reason there are almost no Germans. I've got like 3 extra here, which means I can't put an entire month down at once to pre-program what I'm getting, so that I know, so that I have to go back and look for that. Just a lot of these little issues that are wearing on me here. And this one, yeah, I really don't know how much longer I'm going to continue. Well, there's an obvious solution, so I can soldier on. I can just rotate the replacement counters if they move into an area. I've got to remember to unrotate them 90 degrees or whatever, and help me remember, hey, I can't use that one by the end of the turn. But another little mechanical little bit of annoyance to add to everything, but it will make it playable for me at least. Germans managed to encircle this British unit again, managing to get their advance from here instead of back here because they had some weaker units in here they were able to slip in. It's still going to be possible to break through, but it's getting harder and harder. I may have to actually commit the British units who are inside, and that's a problem because they immediately each lose a strength point. Now, one of them can't. He's a 1 strength point division. But the other one here can take that 1 strength point hit, but that reduces the opportunities and keeps bleeding the British. And we're also actually beginning to cut into their supplies significantly over here. I may have to rearrange some of the German supplies. It could have happened during the turn. Recovering some units. They did some weird little attacks here. March attack against one of these hexes, drove the unit out. Then they did their regular attack against one, drove it away. They're just doing attritional attacks, essentially. They force the French units are so weak they force them out, but they don't want to advance. They're extended too far as it is, and there's just too much power here for them to attack easily. They don't want to spend supply if they can help it. A choice was made not to attack here or here. It was just too difficult, and they didn't want to attack up on this trench line either. So they're kind of wearing down, but finding new little places, like over with the Brits, to engage. But they're kind of running out of opportunities here. The line can be reestablished around there, and there's enough French units beginning to grow that I think it can be. I think we've got kind of the extent of the German advance for this year. I don't see it going much further. But I said that before, and they found some way of pulling some pretty major advances out of their ass with this surrounding. They might find another one. They've got a line up here that's very weak for the Brits. If they can break that and get over to Dieppe, that's going to be painful too. English reinforcements plus troops forming up here managed to combine, make an attack on here. They destroyed one of the units there, but it only did 3 points to a 7-point stack, didn't force it to retreat. That made the Allies think twice, as it were. So they made a second attack here. Now, if they had thrown these in, they probably would have succeeded. But they made an attack here against, actually, these two against this, and they threw the Brits in here, took a loss on the Brits, still didn't break out. I got to get a little marker for that to indicate that that's been stuck there for one 4-day turn, because in 2 more it will surrender overall. Plus the losses that it took are surrender losses. The one step that it took, the French took the rest of the losses. This was an unsupplied attack. It's looking like that surrounding situation may just hold, and that's a really, really bad situation for the English. Plus they left this part of the line weak. They had a reinforcement. They could have plugged it up heavier. On the other hand, you can see the French kind of curving around, getting into position where this line may end up connected again. That would be nice. Down here, they weren't able to do a lot. They're trying to solidify their position. You can see here where it's a little cleaner in my view. We're not talking too different from before, but we are kind of swamping around Paris up here in the north, and that doesn't look good. All right. Germans solidify their surrounding of this British unit, and they punch not a hole, but a little further down here. Not really extending their, not extending their own frontage. They pushed that powerful mountain unit out of an entrenchment it was building. Puts them in a position where they can hit this piece a little more easily, continue their encirclement of Paris, which, if that happens, I think things are just getting really ugly. More fresh British troops, some French even throwing themselves in against here. I didn't do a secondary attack that I was looking at with the French here. I calculated it out. French were going to have limited chance, basically no chance of dislodging it, and they'd be taking much, much heavier losses. In fact, the British took some pretty heavy losses. They threw their surrounded unit into this. Elsewhere, trying to tighten the line, putting replacements right in the line. They don't strengthen it at all, but they can recover quicker, and that way I get them on the line faster than I would otherwise, because I can't move them the turn that they, essentially I move them the turn they go up there. I can't move them the turn they actually turn into real troops. So this is the safest place to put them in a sense. They, I think, can retreat, but it makes them kind of a target, because if you knock them out of there, they don't form up, because the headquarters has been destroyed in the process of retreating them. Elsewhere, pretty much the French are ignoring the line everywhere else. They can kind of get away with this safely right now. The Germans don't seem to be fighting over in this sector. They've given up and focused all their attention onto expanding this salient and trying to capture these Brits. All right, last turn of the month, and if the Brits don't get out, and I don't think they're going to, they will surrender, and that means, I think, 2 big divisional pieces back in the bag. The Allies can't afford that now with the Belgians sticking out of the war. German attacks continue punching to the Seine here, and also cracking the French line here. They had to retreat to the headquarters. That's just a requirement. They can spread back out during the French turn to fill that gap in, but curving around here, still not in a position where I've got the, even though I've got both sides of it, I've got 2 units next to me. That's enough to keep that trench line secure. But, it's widening the gap, threatening to connect up here and surround Reims, which will be painful. Also made an attack on the British trenches here. No special bonuses, and a lot of supply was spent. I got to reorganize supply and bring troops down. This guy forgot to move. They just missed, though. They spent like 3 supply on that attack, and the Brits held. I don't think they're going to be able to get these guys out, though. And defend this piece of the line and everything else they have to do. There are no British replacements or reinforcements coming in. Looks bad. Well, that's the end of 1914. And it was not a good year for the Allies at all. Yeah, the Brits attempted an attack here, failed on it, lost their units, surrendered. We've got total losses here. 700 for the French, and, a little over 100 for the Brits. Germans, a little over 300. Not at all good. Well, I'm not sure what the next year brings. I've got to set up the next month. There were times when it looked like the German assault was halting, but it doesn't look like it anymore. It looks like it hasn't ground to that halt, that it can still find places to make these attacks. Now, I'll see when the trench lines are drawn, but, these areas are very weakly defended around here. Now, granted, the Germans can't really get around there. Where they can get around, the French do have a decent amount of troops. This is a possible attack, though. Basically looking at, can I pocket Paris itself? If I can form a line where the French don't have Paris as part of their line anymore, that's going to make life a lot harder on them. So we'll see whether or not it happens. The British line looks weak as hell, too. There's this space here which only has 2 strength points in the clear that could get hit from 2 hexes, kind of start threatening to cut the British in 2 even. They'd have to react. They'd have to either pull out here and try to defend Dieppe. I don't know what to do if they lose Dieppe and Rouen. One would imagine the Brits would still stay in the war, but I have no idea if they have no channel ports left. According to the rules, the reinforcements wouldn't show up. But then again, I allowed the mobilization centers north in France that were overrun to still show up. Those were headquarters and stuff. So a little different situation. But you got to figure the British troops would be able to land in the west of France. It would just be harder, maybe delay them all a turn. I don't know. That's probably too difficult for me to actually handle. So I might just let them come in on the west map edge at that time. Doesn't really make a difference. All right, up it goes.